Parshas Vayeitzei is the parsha of the transformation of Yaakov Avinu. According to Chazal, Rashi brings it down, at the beginning of the parsha, Yaakov Avinu was 63 when he left the house of his parents, but on the way he spends 14 years in the yeshiva of Shem Va'eva. Gemara says so. Right? And then, so when he's arriving at the house of Lavan, he's 77 years old. But think about it for a second. He's 77, he's unmarried, he's single, he's penniless, he's on the run from Esav. This is not a good time for Yaakov. He starts off really at a very low ebb in his life, right? Nevertheless, he gets this special dream of the Malachim on the ladder, and that gives him koyach. Vayeitzei Yaakov es raglov, says the Ramban, that kovei Hashem yachalifu koyach, that an increased understanding of our mission in life and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and our Munah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yachalifu Koach, Yalu Eva Kanasharam, you can soar like with eagle's wings once you get a refreshed memory, a refreshed understanding of our mission in life and our connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's what happens to Yaakov Avinu. Parashat Vayeitzei is exactly 20 years. Yaakov says so himself. At the end of the parsha, he says exactly 20 years. And when he starts off, as I say, he is completely penniless and single and lonely and on the run. And when he ends up at the end of the 20 years, he's married with 4 wives, 11 sons, 1 daughter, and he's wealthy, and he's able to meet Esav fearlessly. And this is the beauty of Parshas Vayeitzei, but there are a few very interesting points in it. I'd like to pick out 1 or 2 details. The first detail is to understand that the Malachi Elakim Olim V'Yorodim, as Rashi says, are Malachim. Why are there Malachim going up and down? Because it's what you call in Buckingham Palace, it calls the changing of the guards. There were Malachim who were looking after him in Eretz Yisrael, and now for the first time in his life, he's leaving Eretz Yisrael and he's going to Chutz La'aretz, going to the house of Lavan, and there are different malachim. Why are there different malachim in Chutz La'aretz? Because Chutz La'aretz has got a different dynamics to it, different spiritual dynamics to it, and needs different protection, guidance, inspiration. It's possible to be an Oved Hashem both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz, but it's different. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Yaakov Avinu, don't worry, or for us to Yomu V'Ked Motzafonu V'Negbo, you can be an Oved Hashem everywhere, on every single place in the world, but you should come back to Eretz Yisrael because that is the source of Klal Yisrael, and that is the destination of Klal Yisrael, and that is our connection. However, what's interesting here is, so first of all, I just want to mention very shortly, in the name of the Chasam Sofer, that he asks a question which some people must have asked themselves occasionally, and that is this special song that we sing on Friday night, Shalom Aleichem Malachei Ashares. It's such a beautiful song, no one's quite sure who wrote it, but it certainly comes from the time of the Mekubalim, the mystical revival of Klal Yisrael following the Arizal and Moshe Corvero in the 16th century. But clearly it speaks about the Malachim of, we're welcoming the Malachim of Shabbos. The Malachim of Shabbos. So why do we welcome them and say Shalom Aleichem, Ba'achem L'Shalom, Baruchuni L'Shalom, and then we say Tzeischem L'Shalom, thank you and goodbye? Why do we say that? Why do we say Tzeischem? In actual fact, I must tell you, there are some people who don't say Tzeischem L'Shalom, but most of us do. What does it mean? So the Chasam Sofer said that actually this story of Yaakov Avinu, beginning of Vayeitzei, that's the Mafteach. Because in Vayeitzei we find the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz, the Malachim of Shabbos are changing places on the border. And the same thing is true, says the Chasam Sofer, about the Malachim of Shabbos and the Malachim of the weekday. That when we say Shalom Aleichem, Malachei Hashalom, we're greeting the special Shabbos Malachim who are coming and bringing with us a Neshama Yasera, bringing with us a raised spiritual understanding and inspiration and a special Kayach of Shabbos, the Shabbos Menucha, and then we're saying Tzeischem L'Shalom to whom? Not to the Shabbos Malachim. We're saying Tzeischem L'Shalom to the weekday Malachim. We say to them, thank you very much for 6 days service. You can now leave, and we'll see you again Motzei Shabbos. That's a pshat in Shalom Aleichem. You can share this with your family tonight when you sing the song. What's beautiful also about this parsha is there is another very beautiful medrash, quite very well known. In fact, most of us heard it in kindergarten, like I did. That Yaakov Avinu lies down and takes me'avnei hamakim, he takes lots of stones, puts them around him to protect him, puts his head on them, and then he has the special prophetic dream. And then when he gets up, it says, Vayikach es ha'even, the stone in the singular. Says Rashi, this is the Medrash. The Medrash is that the stones were fighting with each other. Each one was saying, Olai Yoniach Tzaddik as Rosh, I want to be the stone that the Tzaddik can put his head on. And what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He fuses them all into one stone. So when you're a 6-year-old, that sounds like a very nice little cartoon story. But actually, when you revisit these Midrashim as an adult, you have to think that Chazal were not telling us fairy stories. That Chazal were telling us stories which had a deep, profound, spiritual message. And this is true in every Maimah Chazal and every Medrash. However childish or simplistic it sounds, it contains levels upon levels of meaning, a philosophical and spiritual meaning. So I'm going to just pick up the writings of Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, the author of the Mesilas Yesharim and the Derech Hashem, the Das Tvunos. For him, this Medrash was one of his favorites. How do I know that? Because if you look, for example, in the Sefer Mesilas Yesharim, you find that in chapter 1, he brings this Medrash, and then in the final chapter 26, he brings this Medrash again. And how does he understand this Medrash? It's not about stones fighting with each other. Stones don't talk, stones don't fight, everybody knows that. They're inanimate worlds. But what is being said here by Chazal? What they're being saying is not that the stones actually fought with each other and spoken and had thoughts and had kavanas and intentions. That's a childish cartoon idea. What it means is the Chazal are telling us that when a tzaddik makes use of the physical world, and not just a tzaddik, you and me as well, when we take a glass of wine and make kiddush over it, that wine is no longer ordinary wine, that's kosher bracha. It has a certain spiritual identity and a spiritual essence to it. It has been transformed by being used for a mitzvah. Every time we use anything for a mitzvah, it is transformed. It's no longer a purely physical object. And the same thing is true here, that Yaakov Avinu, by using these stones, transformed them. So what does the Medrash here mean? It doesn't mean that the stones were talking to each other. It means, were the stones able to speak, that's what they would have said. And that's how you have to read a lot of Midrashim like that. When the Chazal say, for example, that in Gemara, in Brachos Daf Vav, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wears tefillin, what's written in God's tefillin, doesn't mean Chas v'Shalom HaKadosh Baruch Hu wears tefillin. Obviously not. It means, were HaKadosh Baruch Hu to wear tefillin, what would be written in those tefillin? That's how you're going to learn Medrash. Medrash is telling us much deeper ideas than that we grasp at first sight. I'll call upon him. The Mesilas Yesharim tells us this beautiful idea that the physical world, you could be mezakeich es hacheva, that the physical world can be refined and can be transformed into something else. And this is a very important yesod he comes back to again and again. The other very important issue is a question which was asked by Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, which I want to touch on because it has a very important educational message for our generation as well. He says that Chazal tell us, and Rashi mentions part of this Chazal, that Yaakov Avinu leaves his parents' house at age 63, and he spends 14 years in the Beis HaMedrash Shem Va'eva, and then he goes to Lavan's house. Why does he do that? He's been told, now's the time to go and find yourself a wife and get married and start establishing the Klal Yisrael, the Jewish family. You're 63 years old. And what does he do? He stops off on the way for 14 years. Why does he need that? So Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, we find that Yaakov Avinu learned, for the first 15 years of his life, he learned Torah from Avraham Avinu. And then afterwards, Avraham died, and then he was learning from Yitzchak. If you look in the Rambam, Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, the Rambam says explicitly that the Yitzchak taught Yaakov Torah. So Yaakov Avinu was already 63 years Yoshev Oholin. He was immersed in spiritual development and studying from Avram and Yitzchak for 63 years. Why does he need now to go for 14 years to Shem Va'eva? And this is a very beautiful, interesting idea. Says Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in Emes Yaakov, he says there are two different types of teaching Torah. There is the Torah al Taharas HaKodesh, Torah which is taught in a Beis HaMedrash, focusing on Emunah and Kedusha and going through Masechtas one after another and learning the Rambam and Tosfos and learning about every single detail of the Torah, and that is a mitzvah gedola of Talmud Torah. Then there's another sort of Talmud Torah, And sadly, I'm just adding my own note here, this second sort of Talmud Torah is often neglected by educational institutions. The second sort of Talmud Torah is to teach the Talmidim, the Talmidot, that when they go out there into the wide world and they're surrounded by materialism and atheism and promiscuity and all sorts of diversions and all sorts of distractions, to teach them how to protect themselves from all those negative influences. How does one live in a base lovon surrounded by sheker and tumah and promiscuity for 20 years and not be influenced badly at all? That's what Yaakov was worried about. He wasn't worried about how's he going to get there. He was worried about how's he going to spiritually survive. How's he going to be able to come back and look Esau in the eye and say, Lovon Garati, the Tariag Mitzvah Shamarti? How's he going to be untouched spiritually? Right? So he went for 14 years to Shem V'Aver because Shem V'Aver, Shem lived in the Dar HaMabul and Aver lived in the Dar HaFlaga. They were surrounded exactly by paganism and sheker and promiscuity and taivas, and they knew how to preserve their emunah and their midas taivas despite all the negative surroundings. That's why he had to go for 14 years to Shem V'Aver as a hachana program, in order to be able to go to the house Lovon and to survive there spiritually. In fact, I spoke a little while ago to one of the Magidi Shurim in one of these Mechina programs here in Eretz Yisrael. They have certain types of yeshivas which call themselves Mechina programs, specially devised in order to give young men a sort of a year or 2 or 3 as a preparatory learning experience to get it for their army service. And these Mechina programs are designed, in addition to teaching them, of course, Torah in the classic sense, to give them also the Torah Shem V'Aver, spiritual resilience, not to be influenced and not to be distracted by all the temptations and all the sheker and all the atheism that surrounds us at every corner. And this is a very beautiful message. Yaakov Kamenetsky speaks about Yaakov Avinu teaching us this message. There's so much in this week's parsha, but this parsha gives us a message from Yaakov Avinu that he's able to build his family and return with a full family, with a lot of material goods, and he's now poised to build up Klal Yisrael, and he hasn't been influenced at all by his surroundings, and he rotzen that we should be able to replicate that in our own lives and teach our children also how to be immune, how to have armor plating, to protect every one of them from the negative spiritual influences of the world around us. V'chei yiratzon.